Welcome to the Mind of Business Success podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Cramer. I have Yakov with us. This is his second time around because, I always bring the really, really good ones back. We're going to talk about your energy and your abundance, and you're going to help us to clean some of that stuff up today, right?
Yeah, it's cleaning it up and it's also finding the gaps we all have in our businesses. The more complex the businesses, typically the more energetic leakages there are. And so sometimes people will look at a specific strategy or a tactic or a funnel when if you solve the energy leak, it creates more revenue and more abundance. It's the craziest thing.
Okay, let's just not even tiptoe around this because people who are listening, probably some are like, "Ooh, this sounds like the perfect conversation for me to be tuning into."
Mhm.
And other people, they're like, "What the fuck are you guys talking about?" Right?
Yeah.
So let's let's get into a little bit more of the what are your definitions, we'll say. Like explain to us, what do you mean by energy leaks?
Mm. So energy, if we start with the notion that we're all vibrational beings, we all have energy, we're all made of atoms. Everyone can agree on that, whether they're spiritual, atheists, somewhere in between. Everyone agrees things are made of atomic particles, right? Atomic particles have an energy to them, right? This is something that's irrefutable. I haven't heard an argument against it, so let's all agree on that. Okay. Energy leakages are things that if you look at in a framework that I like to use called the map of consciousness, it was originated in a lot of different faiths, a lot of different spiritual practices. Dr. David Hawkins really made it more mainstream. There's a great book called Levels of Energy by Fred Dodson, one of my favorite books. And essentially, what it does, it measures energy, okay, on a scale of 0 to 1,000. And there's different adjectives we can use to describe different things. And so if we look at what's coming into fruition. I'm going to use the word manifesting here. A lot of people hear the word manifesting, they don't really know what it means. For our context here, it's bringing something into the 3D. What does that mean? That means we can touch it, smell it, taste it, feel it, okay, hear it. Versus visualizing something is not manifesting it. Okay. And the process for manifesting something typically requires thought, word, and action. It's not this like just, it can be a quantum based process, but what we're talking about here is how do we work with the energetics of a business and the energetics of ourselves, combine that with who we need to be, who we're being, who we're becoming, and real world strategies. And the cool thing around any business strategy and tactic, it has energetics, right? So, what are the three energetics that come into it? It's the energy of the business owner, leader, right? It's the energy of the brand identity itself. And it's the energy of the actual business operationally, what the business is delivering, who the team members are. So, there's a lot to unpack here. The simplest way to look at it is everything has an energy. And it's just like, as a business owner, if you look at your numbers, which I know sometimes scares people. I know there's people here who are very experienced in business, people just getting started. But if you don't understand the fundamentals of looking at numbers and cash flow management, it becomes very difficult to build an abundant business and an abundant life. Same thing with energetics. You don't have to be an expert in this stuff, but understanding these fundamental things and some of these laws and principles that we're going to talk about really makes it so much easier and more effortless to create what you want.
So you just threw out a very wide net here, right? We're talking about the gamut from
Hmm.
the individual all the way, through the entire business. The consciousness, the mindset, the energy of your team members, what you're putting out there in terms of your marketing and your deliverable. There's a lot of different places where
Hmm.
people can be out of alignment, incongruent, have wacky, weird energy. Um, I mean, certainly we all know from personal experience that our own energy is oftentimes out of whack. We have fears, we have limiting beliefs, we've got weaknesses, we're overcompensating, we're addicted to working, whatever it is, right? Like everybody's got different stuff going on. How do you even begin this process? How do you distill it down enough where you can say, okay, this is an area that needs attention?
Well, the easiest way is to look at results. look at what's currently showing up in the 3D, right? Because the result in business, there's numbers, there's KPIs, there's things, there's also energetic data and energetic levers. So all these things that you may have heard about business or studied about business, things like leverage, things like, KPIs, watching your data, things like leadership. There's an energetic way to look at all those things. There's energetic levers, there's energetic KPIs, right, based on energetic data. And it's not just a feeling, by the way. And there's energetic leadership showing up in the energy that you need to show up as for the business to create what you want it to create, right? So, a lot of different tangents here. The first starting point, though, is just awareness, right? Understand, okay, there's an energy to everything. Okay. And typically, like attracts like, right? And whether or not you believe in the law of attraction isn't even relevant here because it's like saying whether or not you believe in the law of gravity. If someone were to try to throw an item off a 30-story building, that item would fall no matter how much they argue it against gravity, right? So the same thing, the law of attraction is simply a universal law. It's irrefutable, right? So like is going to attract like. So like one really easy practical thing anyone can do whenever you're making a decision in your business or in your life, look at the state and the energy that you're in, not the state that you'd like to be in at the moment. What state are you in? And it's okay sometimes to feel those lower energies, to feel angry or afraid or needy or like you're trying like people listening to this. Here's a question for people. If you ever felt like you were building your business but you were trying to build your business or you were trying to be successful, there's a huge difference in trying to be successful versus being successful, because trying is like a needy energy. It's like forcing, I got to do this thing, do this thing, do this thing, right? And it's like this insatiable desire versus just making a decision that's power versus force, right? So if you find yourself in a lower energy, do your best to either put off making the big decision until you're in a more neutral or better yet, more energized place, right? Or get yourself up to neutral. And this is another mistake that people make, like without understanding the scale, is let's say they're in an angry or shameful place, whatever the case may be, and they're feeling that. They're like, okay, how do I feel love and joy right now? It's like, well, it's so much easier to just go up to neutral first, right? To get up to boredom first, then up to courage. So I kind of look at it like playing an instrument, right? Once you understand the scale, once you understand energetics, you look at where there might be leakages, right? There's so many different applications that we can talk about: marketing, sales, team, all these different things. But it starts with just having the awareness of it.
When someone is new to these
Hmm.
concepts, there's a couple of different things that I've seen happen, and you probably have as well. One is it's like a light bulb moment.
Hmm.
Like, oh my God, that just makes so much sense. Like, oh, okay, I can definitely see where, things have been going awry. And for other people, kind of funny, my teenage son was asking me the other night to explain more about the ego. And so I'm doing my best to speak it in the language that a 15-year-old boy would understand. And he looks at me and he says, Mom, that's like math. I don't understand math. I don't understand what you just said. And so for someone who is in that place where they're thinking to themselves, I want to get this because I feel that something is off and I feel a calling to make some type of change and something about this resonates, but I'm afraid that I can't figure this stuff out. I want to speak to that fear-based belief
Hmm.
because the mind has a tendency to go into overwhelm. And when we go into overwhelm, we revert, we do not
Hmm.
take action. This is such a valuable thing that we're talking about here that I really want people to lean into this. And perhaps you can speak to some of the different tools or processes that you use to sort of reassure someone they don't have to figure this stuff out. They don't have to, I have a master's degree in metaphysical science. You don't have to get a master's degree to figure this stuff out, right? Can you shed a little bit of light on how you figure this stuff out?
Well, the first thing to think about here, there's no figuring it out. It's an ongoing journey. It's part of the game of life and being here on this planet and exploring ourselves, right? So the concept that I've developed is called spiritual genius, right? And so I believe innately each human being, if we have a soul, this spiritual genius is already within us, right? It's just a matter of cultivating it. You're already a spiritual genius. It's just unpacking the blocks to getting there or the limitations. And so, what is spiritual genius, right? And then we can talk about energetics. Spiritual genius to me comes down to three things: connection to source, we could call it God, the universe, whatever word you want to use, right? Connection to self, that's self exploration, and connection to spiritual code. What is spiritual code? It's the stuff that we're talking about here. It's energetics, it's understanding there are laws and principles that are governing the way reality is created, right? And under the assumption that it runs on a particular order, okay? And so this spiritual code, right? If someone's not necessarily spiritual or religious and they're like, okay, connection to source, I don't know how I feel about that. Connection to self, everyone likes learning about themselves, right? That's why all these modalities are so popular. Everyone wants to like take a personality test. There's those BuzzFeed quizzes that used to be around. I don't know if they're still around, but that's like you have to ask yourself, why is that? Why are we so self-obsessed? Is it an egoic thing where we just like, no, it's because we want to know ourselves. We want a deeper connection to self. We want a deeper connection to source. And we want a deeper connection to these spiritual codes, right? And these spiritual codes, if you go with their flow, right? If you understand the codes, you start to look at life through a whole different lens. And my perspective on anything that I do, whether it's business, whether it's socializing, anything that manifests, right? Anything that comes into reality, I look at it through the energetic lens first. Okay, what's the energy of that? And when you can do this, you can almost predict the future in a lot of ways, right? Not always. And sometimes this is where having coaching and mentorship and guidance comes in, is sometimes we're too close to a situation to see it neutrally, but it makes the game so much more fun, right? So this is available to everyone. It's just cultivating this perspective, right? It's just like learning anything. I think the art of learning is in itself like an art. Like, how do you learn something? And so this isn't a mental process necessarily, right? Although if we could talk about information, the best way though is to experience it, right? And we can share a couple examples of that in a moment, because the reason I call it spiritual genius and not spiritual intelligence is because it's mind, body, and soul. It's not just a mind thing.
I love that. Let's go deeper into that. You said there are some examples that you could get into. When someone is intellectually understanding something,
Hmm.
it's certainly better than nothing, but
Hmm.
it oftentimes doesn't translate very well into positive, using the terminology manifestation, right?
Hmm.
We know a lot of things intellectually, and yet how many people listening know what they should do for their marketing, or what they should do, using should, right?
Hmm.
Should do for sales, what they should do, this, that, and whatever else, because there's thousands of books and thousands of gurus and all sorts of uh, commonalities and cliches in business. But now that mind, body, soul, that's where you start to embody it, where it's not just intellectual anymore. I love
Hmm.
that you are really kind of shining the light here on this. What we're talking about here then is not just more intellectual stuff, right? It is more of a embodiment, so that you are actually able to change, which is not, to your point before, it's not just like you flipped on the light switch and now you're enlightened and everything is
Hmm.
rainbows and butterflies from that moment forward. It really is an ongoing evolution and unfolding. So can you share with us some of that, um, some of those examples?
Hmm. So just like in anything in business, it comes down to implementation, right? It's like the whole analysis paralysis that applies to business, that applies to spirituality. Right? There's so many different books, resources, rabbit holes, retreats. There's so many different things. The reality is you have to be intentional, right? And implement, get data. The cool thing is you can implement something and see what manifests pretty quickly. Sometimes even immediately, like if you're already close to that energy field, right? It's kind of like the way that I think of it before we get into the examples. Imagine you have a water park full of swimming pools, right? And your current reality, whether it's in your business, your personal life, your health, whatever the case may be, right, is a certain reality. There's a current reality in the 3D, right, that we can measure, we can touch, see, taste, feel, hear, right? And if the reality that you want to create or manifest is completely different, right? Let's say someone was making $1,000 a month and they wanted to make $100,000 a month every month. Let's just say, like for easy math, they want to 100x their income, and they've never done that before, right? That's like going from being in a water park here in Phoenix to wanting to be in a lake in the middle of Australia, right? You're not just going to walk over. It's not the pond next door. You're going to get to an airport. You're going to get on a plane. There might be a connect flight. There's going to be some travel. There's going to be some transformation that happens in the 3D. There's going to be thoughts, words, and actions that are going to be different. Okay. But eventually you get there. And so sometimes it might be easier to go to the next water park over first, right? And then you say, wait a minute, there is an airport that's not too far away. Let's take that next plane, right? So when we think of it that way, I look at it like building a golden bridge, right? From like current reality to future reality. So if we were to take it and make it really practical, give me a problem that, a lot of business owners face, maybe one that you face in your business, anything around marketing, sales, hiring, like give me a specific problem and I can show you how it plays out energetically and how like there's some high probability solutions that can come to us.
Sure. I'll be very, very vulnerable. I'll share a challenge that I've recently gone through in my business.
Okay.
So I invested in a consultant to help me learn how to scale my sales team and
Okay.
invested a ton of resources, financial and time.
Mhm.
Went through a lot of different people, and we really just could not get it to click. The energetics were consistently being tweaked but still off, and it just for one reason or another just couldn't get it to click into alignment and work in my business.
And your intention with that was for sales to happen without you being on sales calls.
Correct.
Okay. And so there's a few different variables that we could look at here. It's interesting because I've had a similar experience. So I was through this earlier this year, right? I actually ended up going to like a spiritual event and coming back and firing my sales team. I came back on Wednesday, fired them on Friday. Was it a little impulsive? Sure, but it was a clear thing to do. And so what I experienced, and then we can talk more about your experience and then like make it even broader, was that if I look back, the energy level, like we look at the map of consciousness of the people that I was hiring, wasn't in alignment with the customer. That was problem number one. And the way that they were selling, the way that they wanted to sell, that was a manifestation of that. Also, my level of responsibility in the sales process greatly diminished. So when we give our power away, typically it leads to less than stellar results. People do the same thing with hiring marketing agencies. They're like, okay, I don't want to learn marketing. You do this. I'll pay you a retainer. And I'm going to get rich. I've never heard it work like that, right? The only time working with marketing agencies works is when there's already a successful proof of concept that you have, and you're the visionary behind the marketing process. And maybe they're helping with some tactical things, some ninja stuff. Okay. So it's just like that with sales teams. So these gentlemen were not, and I went through, actually give more context, between January of 2023, when I started hiring salespeople with that same intention. Oh, yeah, we're going to close high ticket sales without me doing it because that's going to free up time and scale and all these things, right? To when I fired the last guy in March of 24. And since then, I've had like different setters, different things. What I learned was they have to be in the right energetic alignment with the business, and also whatever their money story, whatever their money energetics are, that's going to impact yours, right? So it gets a little bit murky there as well. And it's one of those things where if I absolutely had to hire a salesperson, number one, I believe, depending on your audience, right? So to take a step back, it's like, what's their level of consciousness? If most of the people working with you are more intellectual, intuitive, and someone's trying to sell them in like a very willful, reactive type of way, right? A low conscious type of way, like using like weird like tactics and like stuff like that, it's not going to try, it's going to turn those people off. Or if they don't really embody the product or the transformation, it's going to turn those people off. right? And also, I believe a lot of the selling happens, pre-selling is a higher energy way of selling, right? For people to come into the call knowing exactly what the process is, having a certain level of trust, where the selling is just like that little getting someone across the goal line, right? And so energetically, that's the most effortless. That's truly more power-based than force-based. So I'm curious in your situation, what do you feel like? Was it the people, the process, the prospects? Like, what do you feel like was misaligned?
Interestingly enough, I think that there were multiple misalignments. So stepping out and implementing someone else's strategy and trying to make it fit in a way that still felt congruent, there was
Mhm.
still a little bit of offness, even though there was a good amount of integrity still there.
Mhm.
And then the setter team, there was just not the quality of people coming in. And even with the best intentions and the willingness to, say, hey, literally, like I'm here to help you with anything
Yeah.
and making myself available. Not everybody operates at that same level. And so the sheer volume of just activity and trying to implement, putting your foot on the accelerator to make things happen without some of those pieces that were, clicking into alignment. It was like building a house on a very, very, very shaky foundation. And it's interesting because I'm the type of person, and maybe some of our listeners also have this experience. It's very common with entrepreneurs. If you look at a goal that you've set for yourself, or if you look at some like potential future scenario that you want to create, you can feel either a connection or like there's a void. There's
Mhm.
something is not clicking. And that's how it always felt. Just
Mhm.
felt like there wasn't it wasn't that absolute like dialed in, I know this is going to work, but I just kept, putting the effort into trying to correct that, and it just wasn't correctable.
Yeah, and also the more people you put into a process like that, I learned this the hard way too, the more leakage there is, right? So for every setter, maybe they're off energetically. They're now it's like more people's energies intertwine, or the closer, and like all these different things. So it makes it very, very complex. Where I've kind of arrived with the energetics of selling, I want people to be as informed and pre-sold as humanly possible. And if they're not willing to take the time to be informed and pre-sold, then they're not a fit. And I'm okay with that in any business that I'm creating and actively spearheading. So I prefer to also sell without sales calls. So if someone looks at a document and maybe then it's a 10-minute conversation if they have one question, it's also available to us, right? So there's so much energetics when it comes to marketing and sales. And I think it's a great example too, because you got to get the hire right, you got to get the process right, and it's also got to be energetically on the same level as the prospect that you're enrolling, right? And your offer is based around hypnosis, right?
Yeah, hypnosis and mindset
So
coaching.
we have to look at the energy of the offer. There's a degree of intimacy there, right? There's a degree of trust. Someone's willing to have that experience, and there's a degree of trust with you. And so unless that it's really interesting because like, feeling it energetically, I feel like the only way to have someone else doing the selling is if they're also doing the delivery on that offer. And if they would be like a right-hand person, that could be an alignment. But like a trained closer, they're literally a hired gun who's there to make money.
Yeah. Yeah. And for clarification, that was into like my
Okay.
group program.
Yeah.
So for my one-on-one services, because it is so intimate, I do not let anybody get even a first session booked without an actual consultation with me to make sure that there is alignment. But with the group stuff, it's a little bit different because there's on-demand resources and it's a sort of a different container. But I can see very much what you're saying. And then my question to you, because everyone listening is sort of filtering it through their own lens and saying, well, I've got this thing going on in my business. And how how do I take all of this awareness now of where there's things off energetically? And I mean, how long is this process of starting to fix it? So for someone listening who is saying to themselves, okay, I think I need this. I think I need this in my business. What does that journey look like?
Yeah, so I'll give you a framework for it that really it makes it kind of practical. And this applies to marketing and sales. It can apply to anything in business, right? So the MOD framework, people can visualize, picture a triangle, right? So you've got your magnetism, you've got your offer, and you've got your distribution. Okay. What do we mean by all those things? Magnetism is really the energetics, the identity, the embodiment of the transformation, the embodiment of the experience. It's the brand identity. There's all these different things that make a brand magnetic. It's your level of flow and fascination with the topic, right? These are things that just they create this magnetism, right? The offer is the energy exchange that you're asking for. What are people getting? What's the transformation? What are your feelings about the offer? If the offer takes you 10 hours a day to deliver and you secretly resent it, there's going to be a cap on your income, right? Learn that one the hard way too, right? So it's these types of things. Does the offer display empathy? Is it really what you want to deliver and what the customer wants? How is it framed? Does it overcome by empathy? Is it overcoming objections, right? What are the hidden objections? What are the objections that they have they don't even know they have, right? So, and then the distribution is simply how do we reach the right people in a one-to-many way, right? You go to a grocery store, you see a stick of gum, that bad boy is distributed everywhere. So it's like you want your message and your offer, your magnetism, if you will, to be distributed in all the right places, right? And oftentimes this simplifies a lot of things. I think when in doubt in business, we've got to simplify stuff, right? So to really simplify it, there's some key systems, right? There's customer acquisition, there's delivery, there's financial management, there's operations, there's team. What else? And there's self-care, taking care of you, how you're showing up, your progress, your growth, like bigger picture vision. So to understand, I think we have to look at symptoms, right? And typically it's just like going to a doctor. You can say a certain symptom and okay, these are some places to look. And sometimes because this is how I see the entire world, someone can tell me something and I'll just like know or have a hunch and we can explore that. And what's really cool about this, it's not necessarily just guesswork, right? It's like, okay, let's implement this thing and then the data will tell us, right? And sometimes it could be as simple as, and I did a meditation on this a little while ago. Sometimes it could be as simple as maybe your home environment or your office environment is a lower energy and it's not aligned with what you want to create. So maybe it's going to work from a really nice hotel for a few days a week, dressing up, seeing what happens. You'd be surprised. If you're on the cusp of going over to the next pool, sometimes that little nudge puts you into a different reality. It's the craziest thing. And we can measure this, of course, with leads coming in, different KPIs, money, all these different things.
This is probably the best time for me to ask how our listeners can connect with you because you've taken us through the journey. And now I think it's within grasp for people. They can begin to see how valuable this can be for them to clarify these things, to clean this stuff up. Maybe there is some simplification that needs to take place, right? But um there's just this potential there. They have the potential. And you've got this methodology that can help bring that potential up and out and clean out some of that, the energy leakages and stuff like that. So where do you send people? Where do people come to learn more about you and connect with you?
Yeah, so there's a couple different places. I'm on Facebook, Yakov SG. I'm on LinkedIn, Yakov Smart. If they go to our website, spiritualgenius.org/contact, they can fill out a contact form if they want to learn a little bit more. There's also a guide if they go to spiritualgenius.org/guide, manifestology for entrepreneurs. It talks a little bit about this energy stuff, but it also gives like some really good high level principles, right? For example, manifestation is not a choice, right? What does that mean? So there's some good stuff out there. I'll say the biggest thing for people, this is what I'm really passionate about, is abundance, right? What does abundance mean? And also, what is the opposite of abundance? Because sometimes if we look at the opposite of something, that's when we know what we want is based on the opposite of what we don't want, right? And so to me, the real problem comes down to frustration and burnout, right? It's like as entrepreneurs, no matter where you are in building a business, whether you've scaled, just getting started, reinventing yourself, right? Wherever you are in that process, there's different levels of burnout, right? There's the burnout of like, feeling tired one day or not feeling like yourself. And then the real burnout is when shit really hits the fan. And that's like those dark night of the soul moments, right? Those big like releasing. So I believe those can typically be avoided, right? With the right consciousness and awareness and just looking at the energy of things. So the biggest thing is, and I believe every entrepreneur, by incorporating some of this stuff, can create more abundance in their business and their life, right? Not just more money, more time, more satisfaction, more joy, more freedom, all these things that we want. And at the same time, another really big thing is the timing of it all. Like sometimes people think they need to get to a certain revenue level to be able to do things a certain way or do things on their own terms. And that's just complete BS, right? You can start now, and it starts with energetic principles, then strategy and tactics. That's if you take nothing else away, energetic principles, then strategy and tactics.
As we wrap up this episode, you spoke about abundance and what is not abundance,
Mhm.
right? Now, we all know what, you're right. We all know what we want when we don't have what we want, right? When we're in a state of lack, we become very clear. If I had this, that would fill me up. I would no longer be in lack.
Mhm.
But that's not always necessarily the case either, right? So we know that a lot of people are superficially abundant. They had
Mhm.
all sorts of stuff. They've accumulated the stuff, they've acquired the money, they've acquired the quote, quote, success as sort of that overcompensation for that lackful feeling, which is an energetic thing. That's a consciousness thing. Is there something that maybe you could leave us with today on this subject of abundance? Something that might plant a little seed in someone's consciousness. What is abundance? What is your definition of abundance?
Well, you've got to have abundance before you have abundance. Let me say that again. You've got to have abundance before you have abundance, right? So it's one of those things that I believe first shows up in the 5D, right? In how you feel, sense. If you ever feel like just something's about to like manifest, but it hasn't yet appeared, it's having that belief. And just like typically the 3D happens a lot slower. And so to me, abundance, it starts with that state of abundance, right? But it's also taking this, and I love this word, I think I heard it from a spiritual author, pronoia, right? So there's paranoia, which is like thinking that everyone's out to get you. Pronoia is the opposite. It's thinking that things are conspiring in your favor, and they are. And so that's where abundance starts. I believe abundance is achievable in any area. It's a matter of who you need to become and energetically aligning with abundance. And then the strategies and the tactics come in. Really, really important.
Perfect. Perfect way to end this segment. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, a bit about your own conscious evolution and journey. You dropped some real nuggets, and I know it's been incredibly valuable for any of our listeners that have stuck with us to the end. So I'm going to encourage our listeners to make sure they reach out to you if this resonated, because there is that feeling that we get. That feeling says it's time for something new. It's time for a change. And some of our listeners are very spiritual already. And so this is perfectly aligned. Then it's like, how do you bridge that gap between that that inner you referred to kind of knowing yourself, which is a big part of the spiritual journey. How do you blend that so perfectly and bridge that with your business success? And you've created a very cool way of doing that.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you to everyone who has joined us. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do so. And until next time, we will see you in the next episode.